Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you. And it is indeed a privilege to invite Stephen shortly now to speak to us. Stephen Smurl is a very distinguished person. He's a very distinguished genealogist. He is practiced as a specialist in legal and probate genealogy and research in genealogy. In 1993, he founded Massey and King Limited, which is the Republic's only dedicated legal genealogy firm. And I've tremendous respect for Stephen because I served with him with Robin on the Methodist Historical Society Committee. And I know his deep interest in history and his ability from that experience of working with Stephen. He is chairperson of the Irish Genealogical Research Society and is, as I say, a very distinguished genealogist. There was a controversy which Stephen, I'm sure, will talk about in Christchurch, Sandymount, and Stephen, as an elder of that church, was removed by the Presbyterian Church following their vote in 2018 and the consequences of that. I'm sure Stephen will talk about that because Stephen is in marriage with Roy Stanley and a very long-standing partnership and marriage between Roy and Stephen. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Stephen and look forward very much to what he has to say to us.
Thank you, Fergus. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Fergus, for that lovely introduction. What I'm going to read out to you now, and I decided to better write something because otherwise I have a habit of waffling on. I could be here for half an hour. But in writing it, I did think, well, maybe I can write this and just not refer to the PCI by name at all. PCI, by the way, just the acronym for Presbyterian Church in Ireland, which I'll use as I'm speaking. It's just easier. But I did think that maybe I could write this without mentioning them, but it became an impossibility. And I'm not here to badmouth them. I'm here to tell my story. Virtually everything I'm going to tell you is in the public domain anyway, so it really didn't make much difference in the end. What I'm going to tell you is, I think, probably best described as a snapshot of my life as a gay Christian in the past 5 to 6 years, and is quite divorced from anything that came before that period. So on Friday, the 4th of November 2011, the year after the enactment of the Civil Registration Act 2010, Roy and I were sat in the back of a taxi, dressed up in our newly bought suits, speeding our way to the registrar's office in Lower Grand Canal Street in Dublin. We were about to celebrate our relationship publicly by entering into a civil partnership. Suddenly, the taxi driver piped up, "So, which one of you is getting married?" And once again, we found ourselves in yet another coming out of the closet moments. For gay people, such moments can present themselves daily, and they can instantly bring on feelings of anxiety and insecurity. Do we hide our sexuality or be honest and risk being snubbed or even stigmatized? On this occasion, heading to what was in all intents and purposes our civil marriage, in name only, there was to be no denial. We both piped up together, "We are," to each other. And without batting an eyelid, that taxi driver gave us the biggest grin through his rearview mirror and offered us both congratulations. The next day, we had a service of Thanksgiving in our church in Sandymount with all our family and friends. That was a service which we devised ourselves. At that time, there was nothing said about how Methodist churches could be used, so we were able to use the premises for that Thanksgiving service, for a service which we devised ourselves, and I have to hasten to add was devoid of any ministerial input. Roy and I based it in some respects on our joint background of Anglicanism. So the next day we held a service of Thanksgiving in our church in Sandymount with all our family and friends, followed by a champagne reception and a 3-course meal in a nearby hotel. In many ways, it was as ordinary and unremarkable as any such ceremony, other than the fact that the couple were both men. It was church that brought Roy and I together. Roy used to sing in the choir of Christchurch Cathedral in Dublin, and sometimes I would attend evensong there, and I would see the choir process in and out of the cathedral. Let's just say he made a huge impression on me, and my gaydar told me that he was worth pursuing. As it happened, I knew another member of the choir through whom I made enquiries. All of this took time, but ultimately It's what led to the two of us sitting together in the back of that taxi, about to exchange rings and together sign a public register. Everyone in our congregation in Sandymount knew of my sexuality, and it was never raised as an issue when I was ordained as an elder in 2007. Christchurch Sandymount was, until April 2020, part of the Alternating Ministry Scheme, run jointly by the Presbyterian Church in Ireland, PCI, and the Methodist Church in Ireland. The scheme operated for half a century, and I'll touch on why it ended a little later. Its aim was to allow these two smaller denominations, which in the Republic are really quite small denominations, to cooperate to keep places of worship open. The Presbyterian and Methodist congregations in Sandymount joined the scheme in 1975, and the collaboration through merger of these two quite independently minded congregations proved highly successful. Returning to the beginnings of my relationship with Roy, the members of our congregation or church in Sandymount were thrilled for me when I met him. Virtually all of them attended the service of Thanksgiving we held in our church on Saturday, the 5th of November, 2011, the day after our civil partnership. And those that couldn't attend didn't, only because of other commitments they couldn't get out of. In our wedding album, we have a wonderful photograph of Roy and me surrounded by the congregation, taken at the end of the service. It was a wonderful occasion, made all the more so because we were surrounded by family members, many of whom had died within a few years. Sharing that day with them meant the world to both of us. Witnessing their joy at the public affirmation of our relationship informed us that society had matured and had now begun to understand the complexities of human sexuality. Then came the passing of the marriage equality referendum in 2015, which for couples like us meant that we could finally marry. We had embraced civil partnership because we saw it as a step along the way, but nevertheless, it was still second-class status, a form of state-sponsored discrimination. Because we were already in a civil partnership, we were allowed to take up what we nicknamed the 50 quid upgrade. All we had to do was to pay the €50 fee and then rock up at the register office on our chosen date, which for us was Monday, the 5th of November, 2018, and repeat the prescribed words, sign the register, and we will be married. By comparison to the celebrations back in 2011, we chose to have a very low-key event with just 12 guests, though this did not belie the importance of the occasion to either of us. Having become a couple in 1999, that's 26 years ago, it was almost 2 decades later before we were formally married. And like so many other same-sex couples, we were immensely grateful that the people of Ireland recognised injustice and remedied the situation. However, just 6 months later, in April 2019, excuse me, our world fell apart, utterly sundered, when our relationship was belittled and our marriage was denigrated. A vicious campaign was begun by a clique within the Dublin and Munster Presbytery, which is an administrative district within PCI, which the Presbyterian side of our congregation in Sandymount formed part. It proved incessant, lacking in any form of mercy, and drove me to the depths of depression, and eventually saw me admitted to hospital, displaying the symptoms of a mild stroke. My first discovery that there had been a problem was when the moderator of the Dublin and Munster Presbytery cold called me at my place of work and hounded me to come alone the next day to meet with him and the presbytery's clerk, but without being willing to disclose to me why they wanted to speak to me or why I had to come alone. So shocked by the menacing nature of this exchange, I declined until they chose to tell me more. This then provoked an exchange of registered letters, ultimately informing me that unless I met them, they would be forced to escalate matters. I informed them in turn that this was their choice. Without disclosing to me what I was charged with, they rushed to set up a Presbytery Commission in May 2019, which the Presbyterian Central Authorities in Belfast packed with 2 additional members, the then Deputy Clerk of Assembly and a high-ranking former moderator. I was forced to use the provision of the subject access requests under data protection legislation to force PCI to disclose to me why I was being pursued. What I discovered was that I had been literally stalked online by a minister in the presbytery who had compiled a dossier of so-called evidence to demonstrate that I was married to a person of the same sex. There included screenshots of myself and Roy taken from Facebook, and even copies of letters we had submitted to Dublin City Council's planning department, which the said minister used as evidence of, I quote, our cohabitation. Moreover, someone had visited the Dublin Register Office and had obtained a copy of our marriage certificate to copper fasten matters. Later on, in October 2019, after I had been removed as an elder, the Belfast Telegraph would report me saying, I felt like a citizen of the former East Germany, discovering that after many years, people I knew had been spying on me for the Stasi. In later May 2019, they ordered me to appear before their 6-person commission, stating that I was allowed to bring someone with me, but that person had to be a member of PCI, not trained in law, and must remain silent throughout the entire proceedings. Other such communications pushed me into depression and anxiety. I lost over 2 stone in weight and became stick thin. Challenged about all of this, it was clear they simply didn't care. Their only objective was to prosecute their case against me. In the end, they made me feel so unwell, at the last minute, I had to decide not to attend the meeting with the Commission. Instead, I submitted a detailed written statement. Here is one example of their inhumanity. They informed me that that they had decided to deliver their findings in early September and directed that I should attend. I informed them that I would be away on a holiday, as I always am at that time of year, and that the holiday had been booked since the very beginning of the year. They then said they would email me their finding, even though they knew that by doing so, I would then only have 10 days to mount an appeal. This was impossible because the 10 days fell within the time I was away. I informed them that under no circumstances were they to make contact with me while I was on holidays. By that stage, I desperately needed a break from it all. They refused, so I arranged for my solicitor to send them a cease and desist letter. Their response was to say they couldn't make any commitments about not contacting me. The upshot was that Roy and I had to travel to Sicily with a laptop and 2 large files in case we had to be ready to respond. Another example is what occurred at the meeting of the Presbytery in November 2019, where my removal as an elder was formally announced. I was later informed that at that meeting, one of my pursuers declared that Catherine Meyer, our then minister, was, and I quote, was harbouring an unrepentant fornicator in our Kirk session. So shocked to the core by this, I made a formal complaint to the Gardaí, which led to an investigation, but which was sidestepped by denials that the words were ever uttered. I could use stronger words to describe about denials, but I'll leave you to decide that. This is just a flavour of what was inflicted upon me, and by extension upon Roy, in PCI's quest to humiliate me because I had exercised my constitutional right to marry the person of my choice. It became abundantly clear that my case was to be a precedent, one to demonstrate to all other gay members of PCI that their sexuality would only be tolerated if they agreed to live sad and lonely lives. Beyond what happened to me, the clique within the Dublin and Munster Presbytery next moved on to pursue our congregation's church council and its minister, Reverend Catherine Meyer. This dragged on for several years, involving the same individuals, the same clique, all determined to bring down the council and our minister. Demands were issued to remove me from the council, to which I had been reappointed as an ordinary member after my earlier removal as an elder. And if the demands weren't met, then action was to be instigated to remove the members of the council and to pursue the minister. Again, these fanatics showed no mercy. I have to say that collectively, in all these latter developments, after my removal as an elder, we did rather outsmart them, leaving them looking foolish in the media. But their final move through the Presbyterian authorities in Belfast even took us by surprise. They pulled the plug on the alternating ministry scheme, using the excuse of ongoing problems with charity regulations. And the ongoing problems with charity regulations were true, there were, but they were not insurmountable. Once that decision had been made, the die was cast, and the Methodist Church had no choice but to go along with the decision. But I can tell you that at all times throughout this appalling saga, the Methodist authorities acted with integrity and with honesty. I cannot put words into their mouths, but what I can say, what I felt I witnessed, and it was horror on the faces of MCI officials as they observed just what members of Christchurch Sandymount were being subjected to. In conclusion, I have two brief points. The first is that from an entirely personal perspective, something wonderful came out of the abuse that was visited upon Roy and me by PCI. On foot of the considerable media coverage our story generated in 2019 and 2020, we received a lot of supportive cards, letters, and online messages from across Ireland. One in particular came from a retired solicitor, Colin Flynn, who I think may be here this evening, based in Belfast. And this led us to be put in contact with a young gay Afghan man who had been living in hiding excuse me, since the return of the Taliban. He was living in hiding since the return of the Taliban. If caught, he faced being stoned to death simply for being gay. In brief, we worked with Colin, with the Irish Refugee Council and the Irish authorities to secure refuge for this young man in Ireland. He now, the young man in question now resides with Roy and me and has just begun a primary degree in law and politics in Trinity College, Dublin. He's a truly remarkable, resourceful, and resilient young man. The second and final point is to note that in light of all I've just said, it's apposite that the PSNI has now announced a criminal investigation against PCI, and the Northern Ireland Charity Commissioner has begun seeking answers regarding the extensive dossiers submitted to it by Lord Alderdice 3 years ago. Personally, having given 30 years of my life to PCI, it's incredibly sad that what has been laid bare by the media since the beginning of this month leaves one to conclude that hunting down queers and marginalising women has been more important to PCI's current leadership than investing in safeguarding its children and vulnerable members. Thank you.
Very open presentation. I've great delight now in introducing Jennifer Clifford. Jennifer and I met on a programme on patriarchy and gender justice in Derry, Londonderry, a few years ago. And we've kept in touch in different ways since then. Jennifer is originally from South Yorkshire, has lived in Derry, Londonderry since 2009, and deeply loves the city that has given her so much in those years in which she has lived there. She is a volunteer with Foyle Rainbow Project, also engaged with the Human Library Project as a book, with the Holywell Community Initiative, and as a facilitator for the Patriarchy and Gender Justice Project. She's also at present a member of the Foyle Pride Committee. Jennifer has a degree in psychology and a master's in applied psychology. She's a writer and a poet and a member of local literary groups such as the Queer Writers Circle and the Silver Tongue Deviants. She is a lifelong socialist, a strong supporter of human rights, and tries as much as she can to be involved and engaged with local groups in support of the Palestinian people. Jennifer, you're very welcome, and over to you. Ah, we've got you.
Yes,
We've got you.
yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you now. Yeah.
This is a new computer, so I'm just learning about it. Right, so thank you for that wonderful introduction, Jonathan. Thank you. My story starts when I was about 4. So when I was 4, I just felt different to other little boys. Because in those days, that word transgender had not even been invented. And I just felt different. So I tended to gravitate towards my sister because I couldn't stand other little boys. They were all boisterous and horrible. Sorry, guys. So I tended to gravitate towards my sister and her friends because I felt safer. And you know, at that age when you play doctors and nurses I was usually the one that was pregnant. So, and then I think when I was 7, and I prayed, as all children do, to the wonderful person in the sky to make things different, and it never happened. But when I was 7, I knew for certainty that I was a girl. But at that age, there was nothing I could do. And I come from a South Yorkshire mining family. And there's no way that I could go to my father and say, look, Dad, I think I'm really a girl. Because he just said, don't be stupid. Go get the coal in. So I continued to try and be the boy that everybody said I was. When I was 12, that was the worst thing that could ever happen, because that's when puberty started. And, you know, muscles started appearing and hair coming out all over the place. And I just felt that my body was betraying me. And I still couldn't understand why I felt that way. I started to self-harm. Those were the days when I first started to think about ending it all. And throughout my life, I've had 3 attempts, very serious attempts at suicide. Because I just didn't feel that I belonged. When I was 17, I managed to get a job as an apprentice mechanic in a very masculine environment, and hated every minute of it. I had to go into the tea room and listening to the bloke talking about the wives and the girlfriends, and she's done it again. She gave me the same snap for me dinner as usual, and I hated it. You know, the page 3 girl pictures up on the walls. But it was also at 17 that I came across the word transgender, because 2 very famous transgender women had both had their life stories appear in the Sunday Mirror. And the Sunday Mirror was, in those days, a rag, still is possibly. And so they weren't very nice about what they wrote about them. The first trans woman was April Ashley, and April Ashley, who died a couple of years ago, who ended up with MBE for her services to the LGBT community. The Sunday Mirror told her story, and it wasn't very nice. It made her out to be freakish and somebody that shouldn't be allowed in sort of polite company, although she had done very well for herself in theatre and things like that. The other trans woman was Caroline Cossey, who was still with us and still living she lives in America now. And Caroline Cossey was a Bond girl. She was on one of the Bond films. Absolutely beautiful. But one of her friends on one of the film sets that she was making another Bond film outed her out to the Sunday Mirror. And rather than let them tell her story, she was very brave and said, I will tell you my story. And some of the things that she was saying was exactly how I'd felt when she was young. That was exactly how I felt. And then I knew then I had a word to explain why I felt the way I did. And that was transgender. I was a transgender woman. At that time, age 17, the treatment for people like me and gay people was electric shock treatment and aversion therapy, where they gave you drugs that made you feel ill. And they tried to brainwash you into being, as we say these days, cisgendered or normal. And I was being tormented enough. So I decided that I would keep it quiet, keep it secret. But I was wearing my sister's clothes on occasions. I was going out as Jennifer, because I've always been Jennifer, hoping that I would never get caught. Still facing suicidal thoughts. Again, another attempt at suicide during that period of time. Eventually, I decided that if this is what everybody was saying, that transgender people are freaks, that's what I was, and I would just keep it quiet. And you can't keep anything like that quiet, really. The story now is that, you know, I've been through 2 marriages, and I had something that's called gender dysphoria. And gender dysphoria is an intense dislike of your gender because you know somewhere that it's wrong, that you are of the opposite gender. And that's how I felt. I eventually, because my youngest daughter married a local guy, ended up in Ireland. We lived on the Newton House coast in a little place called Mill Isle. And my wee daughter, my youngest daughter, had become the postmistress in Mill Isle. Well, my partner Ruth, my second partner, because as I said, I'd gone through 2 marriages, 2 relationships. My second partner Ruth had mini strokes while we were in England, so we decided to move near to Josie, my youngest daughter, so that she could be, you know, near Josie and help with Ruth. And by that time, the old feelings of being the wrong person, the wrong time, in the wrong place, and in the wrong body hit me again in a massive, vicious way. I was depressed all the time. By then, I got really interested in computer gaming, so I was always in a computer game and not talking to people, not really functioning as a human being. And I remember one day, I decided we had a wee rescue dog called Kipper. And I remember and we lived in Mill Isle. My back garden opened onto the beach. I opened my back gate and went onto the beach, and I would take Kipper for a walk on the beach. And it was about October time. And as I walked closer to the sea, it was cold. I knew it was cold, and it's the North Sea, so it's always cold. And I knew that if I walked out there about 100 yards, I would freeze to death and drown. And that's what I was doing. My feet were in the water. When I looked down, and Kipper, my wee dog, was looking at me, and he was saying, "I want my dinner." So I had to take Kipper home. But my youngest daughter, Josie, she knew that I had thought about ending it all. She was very, very clever like that. And she sat me and my partner Ruth down and said, "Look, if you two don't sort this out, you're going to kill each other." And she was right. So the next couple of days, I agreed. And then Josie asked me the $1 million question. And what trans people like me go through, male and female, we go through what we call a transition. And she asked me that $60 million question. Are you going to transition? And I had to say yes. Because next time that I tried to end my life, it would work. And that wasn't fair on them. And it wasn't fair on me. So I went to see my GP in Mill Isle. It was a lady doctor. and told her, I'm suffering from gender dysphoria. It's killing me and it's killing my family. And if I don't get any help, it's going to end in tears. And she looked at me and said, well, oh, and I need to go to the gender identity clinic in Belfast, because that's where the gender identity clinic was in those days. I need to go to the gender identity clinic in Belfast to have it sorted. So she said, well, you know more about it than me, and referred me. And then 3 weeks later, I was at the gender identity clinic in Belfast. 4.5 years later, after my treatment, which included hormone replacement therapy, HRT, psychiatric treatment, I finally went to Brighton for my what we call gender affirmation surgery, and here I am. That was I had the surgery in 2014. I came to Derry in 2009 because I had friends here, and decided that there was no way that I was going to sit and hide in my flat. So I went to the local college and got a course, health and welfare course, which then allowed me, because it was a foundation course, then allowed me to make my way into McGee, where I did psychology for 4.5 years. When I finished my psychology, I then went to the gender identity clinic which is now in Brackenburn in Belfast, and helped the team until a few years ago when I decided at that age that the drive into Belfast was not doing me any good, and sort of semi-retired. But I've always been involved with the LGBT community in Derry. So ever since I came here, and the Rainbow Project especially, and so that is now what I would consider the work that I do. You know, helping people to come to terms with who they are as people. And for me, it's as though all the things that happened before I transitioned, before I became Jennifer, happened to my brother. That was this mysterious brother who's disappeared, because that's the only way I could handle it. And yet, I feel that I've achieved a lot. I've achieved things that other people may not have achieved. And for me, it was me as Jennifer that achieved it. And the great thing about Derry is they welcome me with open arms. I used to be a blow-in, and now I'm an actual citizen because I've been here that long. But I've never had any problems at all in Derry. I've had more problems in Belfast, in early days of transition anyway. But for me, and being a socialist as well, I've got a great belief in people, a great belief that ordinary people can succeed in anything they want to do as long as they're given the support. And that support can come from people like me, especially in the LGBT community, people who've gone through it, experienced it, and know what it's like, and know what it's like to be in the depths of despair because you don't know which way to turn. And I just hope that what we're seeing happening in the world will soon end, and that the world will be a better place, because we all deserve a better place, no matter who we are. We all deserve to be human. And that's the sort of message that I try to get across, that we're all human. We all have red blood. We all breathe the same air, and we're all human. And that's what connects us as people.